Can you knit a crochet pattern? Of course you can. Can you alter it to fit you? Of course. Stay with me and I'll walk you through the process of how I'm planning to take this tank top that I have fallen in love with and change it into a knit pattern that I can either knit by hand or use my knitting machine for. Hello! Welcome if you're new here. Welcome back. I'm Tracy from Tracy KM Designs, and I'm not a designer in the idea of I went to design school, fashion school. I learned to design for myself and for the people that hired me or I made for by trial and error and by what I do for anything, research. When I first started knitting, there was only the library. There was also a local yarn store, but I did not really feel welcome there as a broke university student. So I learned everything through books, no YouTube. And there were a lot of fit issues that I had. It was the late 90s. Drop shoulders were popular. They would hang so far off my shoulders. Sweaters would be snug on the front and loose and baggy and sloppy on the back. And I was like, why? I made it according to what it says is my chest size. And it wasn't until I actually got into sewing and I had the exact same thing happen that I thought, what's going on here? And I discovered with sewing patterns first that the big four tend to design for a B cup. And I was not a B cup. However, knitting patterns were exactly the same. In fact, they didn't even acknowledge the idea of having different cup sizes. Your chest was your chest, and it was divided in half, and half was your front, and half was your back. And I was not built that way. I'll show you what I mean. This piece of yarn represents my total chest circumference. Not exactly like that. Come on. I put it together. This is what sewing pattern companies and knitting crochet designers think your chest is like equally spread front to back. I'm not built that way. I'm actually built more like this. This is my back, and this is my front. 3-inch difference between if I just divide me in half or if I measure across my front. 3 inches makes a big difference when it comes to something fitting or not, especially if it is already got 0 or only slight positive ease. And if you've got negative ease, then it's going to be really upsetting. So this is why you might not be happy with your knits or your crochet tops or even sewing tops, because designers think we're all shaped like this, and we're not. So let's fix that. And at the same time, I'm going to walk you through how I'm turning a crochet pattern into a pattern that I can do however I want in the future. My next plan is to machine knit, because I have this yarn that I'm not overly keen on it with the crochet sample. Same yarn, different color. But as a knit, I really like the way it stripes. And I want the same top that I have, but just like this now. So I'll walk you through how I'm going to do that. I started off by going to the Craft Yarn Council website because I thought maybe I could get a schematic of basic sizing or like a sweater sketch that I could use and input my own sizing. They don't have it. I looked everywhere. I could find standard measurement chart, which again, totally did not acknowledge that women have a bust, but I could not find an outline. So I asked ChatGPT to make me one based on the Craft Yarn Council measurements, which is I think what I said, I may have also put in my own measurements. I'm not too sure because I think ChatGPT hallucinated and added a few measurements that aren't on the chart. And the other problem was it could make me the pattern once, but when I asked it to make it as a JPEG or a PDF that I could print, it couldn't replicate this. So we're not quite there at AI taking over the world. So I had a front view made, and then I was finally able to get the back view made. But when I sat down to compare it to my actual measurements and the Craft Yarn Council measurements, I had to make a few changes, notably my front bust versus my back, and also shoulder to bottom length, because I got bumps to go over on the front, but not on the back. So I had to change that length as well. And again, knitting crochet patterns don't usually acknowledge that. And it's one of the top complaints I see when people show off their new makes. The front rides up. Yeah, the front rides up because it's going over a couple bumps. Sometimes big bumps, little bumps, whatever. They're still bumps, right? So your back length and your front length should never be the same unless you're totally flat. Right. Done. Okay. So I inputted my own measurements. I took a look at this top that I made that I want to replicate. And I've already talked about how I made a few changes in the previous video, where I started off with making the front the medium size. And then when it was time to split it at the underarms, I made the front the large number of stitches, and I made the back the small number of stitches. Worked out perfect. Usually in knit, I would add short rows for the bust. Won't get into that right now. But because of the stitch pattern in here and being crochet, I wasn't too sure about adding short rows. I didn't think it would work. So I just changed the stitch counts. Worked perfectly because, in particular, the only shaping here is going up here to make it wider, as we'll see in this. Okay. So I measured out my finished garment, more or less, and this was the front. This is where it widens up. There's no shaping for a neck or shoulders or anything like that. Now it does say the same width at the bottom because it's knit crocheted circularly until you split there. So there really isn't a front back to worry about there. But once you split it, that's where you need to take into account your size difference. On the back, I added a tiny little bit of neck shaping. And I think on the next one that I make, I'm also going to just narrow it in a little bit on the shoulders. But now I have this schematic that I can use for any stitch pattern, crochet, knit, machine knit, that I want to. Pretty straightforward, right? And this is a perfect one to start with because it was quite a simple pattern. But let me give you a few more tips. So my first big tip is to make a big swatch, bigger than this. This is very bare bones. When I made my first All About That drape, my swatch was probably about that long. Just keep at it. Take the time with the swatch. Get to know your yarn. Get to know what it likes. Yarn talks to you. People think I'm crazy, but if you're a knitter or crocheter, you probably understand that. So make a big swatch. And then my next tip is don't use one of these rulers. Take measures. Sometimes they stretch. Sometimes they lose their ends. Markings come off. It's really hard to get it to lay flat, right? These are for measuring people, not for measuring something flat like this. Make sure your tape measure is accurate. A wooden one is usually pretty accurate, but compare a couple times. Sometimes rulers that come in from China are not accurate. One of my favorite rulers to use is this one that I bought about 30 years ago on a road trip with my now husband. It's a perfect size to keep in my wallet. And it's flat, works well. And I don't have to try to finagle it. So this swatch I made quite a long time ago on my knitting machine. And usually what I do is create a yarn over hole to indicate the tension size. And I don't see one on here. When you're machine knitting, the instruction book will have you mark particular stitches and particular rows to make it easy to use their ruler. So now I have this swatch, and basically I can't use it because A, I don't know what knitting machine I used. B, I can't tell what tension. And I don't want to go through my 5,000 notebooks to find out more detail. You just count your stitches in 4 inches. Don't just count 1 inch. Count 4 inches. Count up to a half stitch. If there's a half stitch showing, you know, if your 4 is there, make sure you mark it down as a half stitch. When you divide it by 4 to get your stitches per inch, you're pretty much going to lose that. But if you don't have it to start with, then you're going to get more off. So once you've found your stitches per inch, you're going to do the same thing with your rows per inch. Measure 4 inches. Divide your number of rows, say 28 rows, by 4, 7 rows per inch. Okay. As the same thing, include fractions of rows because they can matter. If you're knitting with a really large gauge and it is, say, 3 stitches per inch, 4 stitches per inch, let's go with 4 stitches per inch. Half a stitch is going to be a quarter of an inch. If you're out a quarter of an inch here and a quarter of an inch here, and on the back a quarter of an inch and a quarter of an inch, that's a whole inch your garment might be out of size. So include those fractions. Once you've got that and you've measured yourself, I measure myself. I use a mirror to make sure my tape measure is where I want it to be. And I don't get too fussy about it because most knitting and crocheting is kind of flexible. I'll just go in and I'll say 17 and a half or 17. I wasn't quite sure what I needed. Multiply it by my stitches per inch, and there I go. Now, if I'm doing this on the knitting machine, I could use short rows to create the extra length in the front. Don't think it's needed in this pattern because of the drape and the design of it. One thing to think about is when I crochet it, it's going in the round. There's no side seams to worry about where it splits, right? But when I do it on the knitting machine, it's going to be knit flat. So if I took my circumference and divided it in half, I will have to increase for my bust because that's not going to be right. So I do have to figure on this pattern how much I need for my front to cast on and how much I'll need for my back, because I'll want to start from the start with my back smaller, not wait until the split. So that's just one extra thing to think about when you're doing it on the knitting machine, or if you're planning to knit it flat for some reason. So that's it for now. I just wanted to give you an update on this wonderful tank top that I love from I Need It Crochet, another great Canadian designer, and just give a bit of detail on how you too can make items to fit you very simply. A few little tweaks. Split the front and back differently. If you're making top down, when you set up those increases, keep increasing for your front. It's pretty simple to add a few little tweaks to make things fit you much better. Anytime you see a pattern, look to see if you're casting on or chaining the same for the front as you are for the back. And pressure designers to realize we have bumps, right? Ask them. Like, I've asked a designer, I said, what cup are you designing this for? And they're just like, well, it's just your chest. It's just whatever the measurement is. No, it's not. If you really want to be inclusive, which I think is impossible, you have to account for that. There is this video that I watch, and he was, oh, it's a whole nother tangent, but he's saying he tries to be as inclusive as possible. He's got 10 sizes in his designs. And yeah, that's great because that's more than what a lot of people design for. But the very fact that I'm short means that it's not inclusive to me. The fact that I've got a larger chest and he's only designing by chest circumference and narrower shoulders means it's not inclusive to me. It's just the way it is. I'm not butthurt by it. It's just the way it is. That's why I make tweaks to myself. And he says he does include information on how to adapt it for your own sizing. A lot of designers don't do that, but you can. You can be your own designer. Trust yourself and give it a try. Come back in a few weeks to see how I got on with doing this on the knitting machine. I hope you have a wonderful day. And if you like this video, learn something new, maybe hit that like button, leave a comment, and even subscribe. I want to get to 175 by the end of the summer. Have a great day.